The desert sun beat down on Jacob Thornton's weathered face as he rode the fence line, checking for breaks. At 63, he moved with the careful economy of a man who'd learned to conserve his strength for when it mattered. The ranch had been his for 40 years now, carved from this unforgiving New Mexico territory with sweat, blood, and more than a few compromises with the land and its original inhabitants. His mare, Bess, suddenly tensed beneath him, ears flicking forward. Jacob pulled her to a stop, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle in his saddle boot. Years on the frontier had taught him that survival depended on noticing things before they noticed you. Then he saw her. At first, Jacob thought his eyes were playing tricks. The heat could do that to a man out here. But no, there was definitely someone lying in the arroyo about 50 yards ahead, half hidden by scrub brush and creosote. He approached slowly, rifle ready but not raised. As he drew closer, his breath caught in his throat. She was massive, had to be close to 7 feet tall, even lying down. An Apache woman, young, maybe 19 or 20, her clothing torn and dusty. Her dark hair was matted with dried blood from a wound on her temple, and her lips were cracked and bleeding from thirst. She was conscious but barely, her dark eyes tracking him with a mixture of fear and defiance that was purely Apache. Jacob had seen enough dying to recognize it when he saw it. This girl had maybe hours left, possibly less. He dismounted carefully, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. The girl tried to move, to push herself up, but collapsed back with a gasp of pain. Her left leg was swollen beneath torn buckskin, clearly broken. "Easy now," Jacob said softly, though he doubted she spoke English. He pulled his canteen from his saddle and approached slowly, hands visible. "Just water, agua." Her eyes fixed on the canteen with desperate intensity. Jacob knelt beside her, supporting her head as he brought the water to her lips. She drank greedily at first, and he had to pull it away. "Slow, you'll make yourself sick." He gave her small sips, letting her body adjust. As the water revived her slightly, she studied his face with sharp intelligence. Despite her condition, there was nothing helpless about her gaze. It was the look of someone cataloging details, making assessments, preparing for whatever came next. Jacob examined her leg as gently as he could, definitely broken, and from the swelling and heat coming off it, infection was setting in. The head wound looked a day or two old. Someone had left her here to die, or she'd been separated from her people somehow. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to give her the rest of his water and ride on, leave her to her fate. There'd been 3 Apache raids in the valley this year alone. The territorial marshal was talking about escalating military action. Taking in an Apache woman, especially one this size and clearly from a warrior clan based on the quality of her clothing, was asking for trouble. Jacob looked at the girl's face, saw the stoic acceptance there. She knew he was weighing her life against his safety. She'd probably seen it before, that moment when white men decided whether Indians were worth the risk. "Hell," he muttered, making his decision. "Bess, we're going to need to rig a travois." Getting her back to the ranch was an ordeal that took the rest of the day. Jacob fashioned a travois from branches and rope, using his saddle blanket as padding. The girl, he'd learned she was called Neol, which he made him understand through gestures meant wind, bore the pain of being moved with remarkable stoicism, though he saw her jaw clench and sweat bead on her forehead. By the time they reached his ranch house, the sun was setting in bands of orange and purple across the desert sky. Jacob's ranch was modest, a solid adobe house, a barn, a few outbuildings, and enough land to run a small herd of cattle. He'd built it all himself, with the help of his wife Mary, dead now 15 years from cholera. He got Neol into his spare room, onto the rope bed where Mary had passed. It felt right somehow, having someone living in that room again, instead of keeping it as a shrine. Over the next few days, Jacob tended to her injuries. He'd picked up field medicine during his years in the cavalry before settling here, and he'd learned more from necessity over the decades. He set her leg as straight as he could, splinted it with boards and torn cloth, and cleaned her wounds with whiskey that made her hiss through gritted teeth but never cry out. The infection in her leg worried him most. He made poultices from yarrow and tobacco, changing them twice daily, and forced her to drink willow bark tea for the fever. For 3 days, she burned with fever, delirious, speaking rapidly in Apache. Jacob sat beside her bed during those nights, keeping her cool with damp cloths, never sure if she'd see morning. On the 4th day, the fever broke. Jacob was at the stove, making coffee, when he heard her moving. He turned to find Nachae standing in the doorway to her room, one hand braced against the frame for support. Even weakened and injured, her height was striking. Her head nearly touched the top of the doorframe, and her shoulders were broader than most men's. "You should be in bed," Jacob said, moving to help her. But she waved him off, determined to stand on her own, even if her splinted leg forced her to lean heavily against the wall. She pointed to herself, Nachae, then to him, raising her eyebrows in question. Jacob Thornton." She repeated it, her accent making it sound foreign but not unpleasant. Jacob. Over the following weeks, they developed their own language, part English, part Apache, mostly gestures and expressions. Nachae was a quick learner, picking up English words with remarkable speed. Jacob learned some Apache in return, though his tongue stumbled over the unfamiliar sounds. She told him, in fragments pieced together over many conversations, that she'd been with a hunting party when they were ambushed by Mexican raiders. She'd fought. Jacob could believe that. She had the build and bearing of a warrior, but had been struck on the head and fallen from her horse into a ravine. When she came to, her people were gone, and her leg was broken. She'd crawled for 2 days before collapsing where Jacob found her. "Your people?" Jacob asked one evening as they sat on his porch watching the stars emerge. "They'll be looking for you." Nachae nodded slowly. "Yes, they look." She touched her chest. "Important. My father." She struggled for the word, then drew in the dust with her finger, a figure with a large headdress. "Chief. Big chief." Jacob felt his stomach drop. Of course, she had the bearing of royalty. He should have guessed. "Your father is the chief." "Yes, Nachae. His name Nachae. She made a sweeping gesture encompassing the horizon. "All this, his people. And they'll come for you." "Yes." She looked at him steadily. "Maybe kill you, maybe." She said it matter-of-factly, not as a threat, but as a simple statement of possibility. Jacob nodded slowly. "Well then, guess we'd better make sure you can walk properly before they arrive. Hard to explain things if you're still laid up in bed." Nachae's lips quirked, the first smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, made her look younger and less guarded. As Nachae's leg healed, she insisted on working. Jacob protested at first, but she was stubborn, and he eventually accepted her help with the lighter chores. She had a natural way with the horses, and was surprisingly gentle with the few head of cattle he kept near the house. What struck Jacob most was her curiosity. She asked about everything: his tools, his books, he had a modest shelf of them, his life. In return, she told him about her people, their ways, their understanding of the land. One afternoon, as they worked together mending a section of fence, she paused and looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Why?" she asked. "Why you help Nachae? White men, they—" She made a gesture of pushing away. "They hate Apache. Apache hate white men. You have war." Jacob set down his hammer and wiped his brow. It was a fair question, one he'd been asking himself. "My wife, Mary," he began slowly, "she used to say that hate is easy. It's the easiest thing in the world. especially out here where life is hard and people are scared. But easy and right aren't the same thing. He looked out across his land, remembering. When we first came here, we had Apache neighbors, friendly ones. They taught us which plants were safe, where to find water in dry times. Without them, we'd have died that first year. He paused. Then soldiers came. Said the Apache were being moved to a reservation. Our neighbors refused to go. It was their land, had been for generations. The soldiers killed them, all of them. Neil was quiet, listening. Mary never forgave that, said we'd been given kindness and repaid it with bullets, made me promise that if I ever had the chance to return that original kindness, I would. He met Neil's eyes. When I found you dying out there, I heard Mary's voice clear as day. So I guess the answer to why is because someone showed us mercy once, and I owed a debt. Neil reached out and placed her large hand on his shoulder. Jacob, good man. Mary, she touched her heart. Good woman. It happened 5 weeks after Jacob had found Nachae. He woke to Bess's nervous whinnying and knew immediately something was wrong. The sky was barely lightening with dawn as he moved to the window and looked out. His blood ran cold. Warriors, dozens of them, maybe 100, surrounding his ranch in a perfect circle. They sat on their horses like statues, faces painted, weapons ready. As the sun rose behind them, they seemed to materialize from shadow into terrible reality. Jacob's hand went to his rifle, then stopped. What was he going to do? Shoot it out with 100 Apache warriors? He'd take maybe 3 or 4 with him before they burned his house to the ground. They come. He spun to find Nachae standing behind him, fully dressed in the Apache clothing he'd mended for her. Her leg, while still healing, was strong enough for her to move without the splint now. She looked past him at the warriors outside. Your father? Yes, and his warriors and my brothers. They find me. She looked at Jacob and he saw genuine concern in her eyes. Jacob, you must go. Out back. Run. I'd tell them you not here. I escape alone. Nachae, I'm not going to. You must. Her voice was urgent. They see you keep me. They think they not understand. Please, run. Jacob looked at the warriors outside, then at this young woman who'd become something like the daughter he'd never had over these weeks. He thought of Mary, of promises made and debts owed. No, he said quietly, I'm not running from the truth. You stay behind me. Let me talk to them first. Before Nachae could protest, Jacob opened his front door and stepped out onto his porch, hands deliberately visible and empty of weapons. The warriors tensed, rifles and bows raising fractionally. Jacob's throat went dry, but he kept his spine straight, his hands steady. From the circle of warriors, one man rode forward. He was older, perhaps Jacob's age, his face weathered and strong, his bearing unmistakable. Even without Neil's description, Jacob would have known this was Nachae, the chief. Behind him rode 3 younger men, clearly his sons, from their resemblance to both him and Neil. They looked at Jacob's house with expressions of barely contained rage. Nachae stopped his horse 20 feet from the porch. His eyes were like flint, hard and sharp. He spoke in Apache, his voice carrying across the morning air. I don't speak Apache, Jacob called back, keeping his voice steady, but I'm guessing you want to know about your daughter. One of the sons spat something that was clearly an insult. His hand moved to his knife. Wait, a voice said from behind Jacob. Nachae stepped out onto the porch, and Jacob heard the collective intake of breath from the warriors. She spoke rapidly in Apache, gesturing to Jacob, to the house, to herself. As she spoke, Jacob watched Nachae's face. The chief's eyes moved between his daughter and Jacob, his expression unreadable. When Nachae finished, silence hung over the ranch for a long moment. Then Nachae dismounted, and the tension ratcheted up another notch. His sons and several warriors did the same, hands on weapons. The chief walked toward the porch slowly, his eyes never leaving Jacob's face. Jacob forced himself not to step back, not to show fear, even as this legendary warrior leader closed the distance between them. Nachae stopped at the foot of the porch steps. Up close, Jacob could see the scars of a lifetime of battles, the intelligence in those dark eyes, the weight of leadership in every line of his face. The chief spoke, his voice deep and measured. "He says," Nachae translated, her voice quiet, "that you found his daughter dying, that you could have left her, could have killed her. No one would know." Nachae spoke again, his eyes boring into Jacob's. "He says that you gave water, that you healed her, fed her, treated her with—" Nachae paused, searching for the word. "Respect. Honor." Jacob nodded slightly. "I did what any decent person would do." Nachae translated, and something flickered in Nachae's eyes, surprise perhaps, at the simplicity of the answer. The chief spoke at length, and Nachae's voice grew thick with emotion as she translated. He says that his people and white people have been at war long time, much blood, much hate. White men take land, break promises. Apache fight back, kill white men. More blood, more hate." She paused. "He says it is good to hate enemies. It is right to hate those who steal and kill." Nachae's voice softened slightly as he continued. "But he says, you are not enemy. You are—" he has no word. "You are different. You see Apache woman dying and see only person who needs help. This is—" she struggled with the translation. "This is old way, before hate, before war. This is how things should be." The chief reached into his belt and pulled out something that glinted in the rising sun, a knife with an ornate handle, clearly valuable and old. Nachae spoke again, his voice formal now, almost ceremonial. "He says this knife was his father's and his father's father's. It has killed many enemies and defended many friends. He gives it to you now, Jacob Thornton, because you have shown that not all white men are enemies. You have shown that the old ways, the good ways, can still live." Jacob felt his throat tighten as Nachae held out the knife. He took it carefully, feeling the weight of more than just the weapon, the weight of history, of choice, of a bridge built across a canyon of blood. "Tell him," Jacob said slowly, "that I'm honored. Tell him his daughter is brave and strong, and it was my privilege to help her. Tell him—" he paused, choosing his words carefully. "Tell him that my wife, many years ago, was helped by his people. I was just repaying an old debt." As Nachae translated, Nachae's eyebrows rose. He spoke quickly, questioningly. "He asks what debt," Nachae said. Jacob told the story of his early years on the ranch, of the Apache who'd helped him and Mary survive, of the soldiers who'd killed them. As he spoke, he saw something shift in Nachae's face, recognition perhaps, or understanding. When he finished, Nachae spoke quietly to Nachae, who nodded. The chief turned and spoke to his warriors in a loud, carrying voice. Whatever he said, it caused the circle of warriors to lower their weapons, though their expressions remained wary. Nachae turned back to Jacob and spoke again. "He says," Nachae translated, "that the debt is paid, more than paid. He says that from this day you are under his protection. Any Apache who harms you will answer to him. Your ranch is safe. Your cattle are safe. You are—" she smiled slightly, "you are family." One of the sons, the one who'd looked angriest earlier, spoke up sharply. An argument ensued between him and Nachae, heated but respectful. Finally, the chief said something that seemed to be final, and the son fell silent, though he looked unhappy. "My brother Calais," Niol explained quietly. "He says white men cannot be trusted, that you maybe keep me for bad reasons. My father says no, that he sees truth in your eyes, that he trusts his daughter's words." The chief spoke again, and this time his tone was lighter, almost amused. Niol actually laughed. "He says you are foolish old man to take such risk for Apache woman, but he says he too is foolish old man, so he understands." She grinned. "He says all best men are a little foolish, is how they stay good." Jacob felt something unknot in his chest. Relief, yes, but also something deeper. A sense that maybe, just maybe, the cycle of hate and revenge could be broken, one choice at a time. "Tell your father," Jacob said, "that he and his people are welcome here. Not many. I don't have supplies for an army. But him and his family, if they ever need water, food, shelter, this ranch is open to them." When Niall translated, Nachae's face showed genuine surprise. He studied Jacob for a long moment, then nodded slowly. He spoke, his voice grave. "He says this is great gift, that he accepts in spirit of friendship. And he says that when drought comes, and it will come, drought always comes to desert, you will be welcome at Apache water sources. Your cattle may drink from Apache springs. He will tell all his people, the old white man with the small ranch is friend, is family." The chief reached out his hand. Jacob took it, and they shook. A white man's gesture, but one that seemed to carry weight here, in this moment, between two old men who'd seen too much war and too much death. The Apache stayed for most of the day. It was awkward at first, 100 warriors camped around a small ranch, their owner moving among them, offering what water and food he could spare. But Nachae's presence kept things calm, and gradually the tension eased. Niall moved through her people like a bridge between worlds, translating, explaining, helping them understand what had happened. Her brothers remained suspicious, but even Calais seemed to soften slightly when he saw the splint Jacob had made, the careful way his sister's leg had been set and treated. As the sun began its descent, Nachae prepared to leave. Niall came to Jacob as he stood by his corral, watching the preparations. "I must go," she said simply. "I know. I will miss this place. Miss you, Jacob. I'll miss you too, Niall. You've been good company. Better than I've had in years." She smiled. "You teach me much. English, white man ways. Some good things." She paused. "I teach you Apache ways?" "You did. More than you know." Niall reached into her clothing and pulled out something small and wrapped in cloth. She handed it to Jacob. "For you. My mother make it long ago. She give to me when I am small. Now I give to you." Jacob unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a small, carved figure of a horse, exquisitely detailed, worn smooth by years of handling. He started to protest. It was clearly precious, but Niall closed his hands around it. "So you remember Niall. Remember that Apache and white man can be friends, can be family." "I won't forget," Jacob promised. "You take care of that leg, and if you're ever out this way again, you stop by, hear me? I'll always have water and coffee." She hugged him then, her embrace strong enough to lift him off his feet for a moment. When she set him down, her eyes were bright with tears she wouldn't let fall. "You are good man, Jacob. Marry, she choose well." Then she was walking away, limping slightly but strong, heading toward where her father waited with her brothers. She mounted her horse with practiced ease, and Jacob saw Nachae rest a hand briefly on her shoulder, a father's gesture of relief and love. The Apache rode out as they'd come, materializing into and out of the desert like smoke. Jacob stood on his porch and watched until they were nothing but dust on the horizon. The years that followed brought changes to New Mexico territory. The Indian Wars escalated, then gradually ended. Treaties were signed and broken and signed again. The Apache were pushed onto reservations, their free-roaming days ended by force and policy. But Jacob Thornton's small ranch remained untouched. Even at the height of the conflicts, when neighboring ranches were raided and burned, his land stayed peaceful. The warriors who sometimes passed through left his cattle alone, took only what water they needed from his well, and moved on. The territorial authorities noticed, of course. The marshal came around more than once, asking questions, suspicious. Jacob always told the truth, that he'd helped an Apache woman once, and her people remembered. "You're a damn fool," the marshal said each time, "consorting with the enemy." "Maybe, but I sleep fine at night." Sometimes in those years, Apache would appear at his ranch. A warrior needing to rest a horse, a family passing through who needed water. Jacob helped them all, and they left small gifts in return. Beadwork, carved figures, once a beautiful woven blanket that he kept on his bed for the rest of his life. And twice, Nachae came herself. The first time was 3 years after that morning with the 100 warriors. She arrived alone at sunset, older, bearing a new scar on her face and the bearing of someone who'd seen battle. But her smile was the same when she saw Jacob on his porch. They spent the evening talking, sharing stories. She told him of her people's struggles, the pressure from the soldiers and settlers. He told him of his life, the small joys of his ranch, the loneliness that came with age. Neither spoke of solutions to the great problems between their peoples. They were just two friends sharing a meal and conversation, creating a small island of peace in a sea of conflict. When she left at dawn, she pressed something into his hand, seeds from a plant that grew near her father's camp. They grow in bad soil, like us, like you. Strong things grow in bad places. Jacob planted them by his porch, and they bloomed every spring for decades after. The second time Nachae came was years later, when both she and Jacob were gray-haired. She brought her own daughter, a serious girl of 12 who studied Jacob with the same intelligent eyes her mother had. "I tell her story," Nachae said that night as they sat around Jacob's fireplace. "Story of white man who gave water to dying Apache girl, who risked everything to help enemy, who showed old ways still good." The girl listened intently as her mother spoke in Apache, occasionally translating for Jacob. When Nachae finished, the girl stood and approached Jacob. She spoke solemnly in carefully practiced English. "Thank you for saving my mother. You are brave man, good man." Jacob felt his eyes sting. "Your mother was the brave one. She survived things that would have killed most people. She says," the girl continued, "that when we are on reservation, when things are hard and she is angry, she thinks of you, thinks that somewhere good people still exist. This gives her hope." That night, as Nachae and her daughter slept in his spare room, Jacob sat on his porch and looked at the stars. He thought about Mary, about the Apache who'd helped them survive, about the soldiers who'd killed those helpers, about a dying girl in an arroyo, about 100 warriors who could have killed him, but didn't. He thought about how close the world always was to tipping into darkness, and how small acts of decency were sometimes all that kept it balanced. Jacob Thornton died in his sleep at the age of 81, in his own bed on his own ranch. The marshal found him 3 days later, looking peaceful. But before the marshal arrived, others came. The Apache scouts saw the smoke from his chimney had stopped. They sent word. And they came. Not 100 this time, but enough. Nachae was dead by then, but Nachae came, gray-haired and dignified, with her brothers and her children and others who remembered the story. They prepared his body in the Apache way, with rituals that honored him as one of their own. They buried him on his ranch in a spot that overlooked the desert he'd loved, with both a Christian cross and Apache symbols marking his grave. At the burial, Niles spoke in English so that any whites who might later ask would understand the words. This man gave water to dying stranger. He asked nothing in return. He risked everything for what was right. We remember this. We will always remember this. Our children will tell our children's children about Jacob Thornton, who showed that peace is possible, that kindness is stronger than hate, that one person with courage can change the world. She placed the knife her father had given Jacob on his grave, along with seeds from the plants he'd grown from her gift, and the small carved horse she'd given him decades before. "Walk in beauty, old friend," she said softly. "Walk in beauty, and know that the water you gave, it still flows. The good you did, it still grows. You are not forgotten." The wind blew across the desert, carrying her words away into the vast New Mexico sky, where perhaps Mary heard them and smiled, and knew that the debt had been repaid, again and again, in ways neither she nor Jacob could have imagined on that first hard year when Apache kindness had saved their lives. The cycle of hate had not been broken. That was too much to ask of one man, one choice. But it had been interrupted, just for a moment, just enough to let light through. And sometimes that was all history needed. One person who chose mercy over fear. One cup of water given to someone who should have been an enemy, but was, in the end, just another human being in need. Jacob Thornton's ranch still stands today, though the house is long gone. But the grave remains, tended by unknown hands, and the plants still bloom there every spring. Tough, resilient things that grow in bad soil, proof that beauty and strength can flourish in the harshest places if someone is brave enough to plant the seeds.